Super grateful. Happy Wednesday, everybody. Whoever's going to be tuning in today or catch this video later. We're grateful to join you today. I'm very happy that Debra Sparrow has agreed to join me here and have a good conversation. It's afternoon my time, morning on the West Coast, but we're all connected anyways, hey?
Well, it's lunchtime, yeah.
Yeah, true. Yeah. It's lunchtime. We changed it up a bit. Debra, could you please introduce yourself for those who are listening?
Well, it's really nice to see you, Emily, after all these years. I haven't seen you in a while, and you're as beautiful as ever, and a beautiful spirit. And I love your top because it kind of matches, as you see behind me, some of the work I'm doing. What a coincidence. Well, some say there are no coincidences. So I'm here in our Musqueam territory, on the lands we've been on for 9,600 years at a place called Jericho, 3,500 years in this particular area. So we're as old as time, and we're still here, and we will continue to, defend our territory here. So welcome to each and every one of you. I've been watching you, and you've had some fabulous people on. I'm going to continue watching you, and I want to hold my hands up to you for the work you're doing. It's so important. Bringing these voices forward is just amazing. I'm in awe of what you're doing, and I'm here to help in any way that I can and support you. And support all the people who have come forward in our common push forward to, really connect our past. Not just move forward by any means. In fact, I'm probably the one that doesn't want to move forward too much. I love my past. I love my history. It's been a real challenge for me to maintain the life that we're in today, because when I'm working on pieces such as the one in the back, I really go there. I go to where my ancestors are. So on behalf of them, welcome to this territory, not on behalf of Debra Sparrow, but on behalf of all of our people who have gone before us, our ancestors who we should never forget, and were taught in our histories and cultures, we don't forget them.
Thank you. And I hold my hands up to you as well. I feel like my job, I'm coming to understand deeply, my responsibility is to be a vehicle, just to hold the door open, try and hold space, have these good conversations in whatever form that might take. And right now it's online, because of the state of things, but I'm grateful for that as well. I mean, when I first met you, or maybe I didn't even meet you, but I heard you speak, it was in that 360 building in Vancouver. I was new, I was a visitor to the territories, and you were talking about Captain Vancouver.
Right.
And that always really stuck with me. So I'm wondering if we could start there. If you could tell me a little bit about what you know about Captain Vancouver, share a little bit of those stories.
Well, Captain Vancouver arrived here in 1791, just idling here at the mouth of the Fraser River, where we are today. And he actually was idling beside a Spanish ship. And the Spanish ship had a young man on board who, of course, was their artist. Because in those days, of course, they brought their artists everywhere they went, didn't they? And there's a saying, beware of artists. They mix with all classes of society, and they are therefore the most dangerous. Now that's a positive dangerous, because if he didn't bring his young 15-year-old artist with him to sketch our people, we may not have seen the originals, but it also verifies that they were here. And history and government, they always have to have a verification. They tell us, prove that you come from here. Prove that this is your history, prove it. But you can't bring archaeology into the courtroom prior to a certain time. I think you can now. But at the time where the most important cases were being heard, you couldn't bring archaeology in to prove that you lived here. You had to have written history. So I advise some of our political people to go and look in the history books where it is written by the Spanish ship and Captain Vancouver that they were here. We arrived on this land, being met by what we know now as the Musqueam people. Right down here where they call it Spanish banks. We're working on that. We're working on changing that. So up on the bluff where you drive along Marine Drive now, and you pass the museum and you head down to the water, all along that bluff there are estates and mansions.
Mm.
And can we just picture the mansions gone and the mansions of our people there?
Mm.
Rows of longhouses, 40 feet, 20 feet, 20 by 40 feet, rows and rows of longhouses all along that bluff, right out to what people know as Locarno Beach. So these two ships are idling there, and down, he writes his words on the Spanish ship. 7 canoes have come down to greet us. And in the front, a man stands on the bow of the boat, his family with him. And we observe that he's wearing, drum roll, a beautiful blanket.
Mm.
He's wearing a beautiful blanket. He's tall in stature. He's very handsome. This is their quote. He reminds us a little of ourselves, of our people. And this is the Spanish people. And he says, inside his canoe, there are many reflections of fishing. We see a harpoon. We see what looks like fishing net. We see all kinds of reflections of fishing. So of course, being the person I am, I jumped on that because we were in a court case for the Sparrow fishing case, which we can get into later.
Mm-hmm.
So I phoned my brother who was the chief, and I said, hey, you better go into the archives and look for this quote that says we seen the reflections of fishing in this canoe. So the man is holding a salmon as well. And he gifts the ship. And as he gifts the ship, they invite him on board. And later he's invited back for dinner with his family. Must have been hard to communicate because nobody spoke English at that time. But he also says that in the canoe is his family. So he talks about the family. He talks about the other people in the family. So he's creating a relationship here. So he decides to turn around and leave. But before he does, he also says and writes, he holds in his hand what appears to be a war club. And we try very hard to convince him to trade us for his war club. But he says, no, he won't have it. Because in those days, when these ships arrived and they wanted to take whatever they were interested in, they would trade with you some trade beads, which you've probably seen on the Northwest Coast. Mm-hmm. Trinkets for this. And, there's pros and cons as to whether he should accept the fish or not, in my view. I mean, to me, it told me that he gifted this fish to the ship. And people can say, well, that's how we bartered. That's how we exchanged value. So they idled away. And Captain Vancouver came aboard as well to have supper with them. And Captain Vancouver stayed, and he idled around to what we now know as Kitsilano. And when he got there, he was greeted by Capilano. Now, we don't want to mix those names. Kitsilano is the name of the beach where people know it. Capilano is leader of one of the tribes in what we know today as Capilano under the Capilano Bridge. So Capilano was living there, but he also had relatives all throughout the area. So all of us in this lower mainland are related. And there were no real big divisions of people. The boundaries came, of course, to separate us and divide us later. But in the beginning, Captain Vancouver was very friendly. He approached in his skiff to the beach in Kitsilano, and he met with Capilano. And Capilano did what most of our people do in a happier situation. They draw a line in the sand, and then you asked if you can come ashore, and it's up to him and his people if you're allowed. So I'm not really sure, and we're not, if this was the first time that our people saw Europeans, but in this particular case, he welcomed him ashore. And the rest you can say is history, but in that period of time, things happened very quickly after they became great friends. Now, Captain Vancouver came back and forth for 3 years after that. He was a great friend, but he also had on his ship his map maker called Joseph Baker. Now, some of you historians out there might know that Joseph Baker traveled. They had to travel down the coast and travel south to go around to get back to Europe. But Mount Baker in Washington State is named after him. So Joseph Baker and him became great friends with Capilano, and they started mapping. After they became friends, they started mapping the area, going out in the canoe with the people, mapping it. And you know what happens when colonials map anywhere? They're pegging stakes in there. They're doing it because they're eventually going to own it. That's the long-term effect of what he's doing. So he's befriending everyone, but he also has, intent. But they become great friends. And about the third year that Vancouver went back to England to report every year to his queen and his uppers, he talked about the intelligence of these people. And he also said that these are an amazing people with intelligence. He also wrote, the women are as beautiful and as regal as our own. We might think that's lovely, but the colonials didn't. They didn't want him getting close to the people. He was there to do a job. But he ended up with a big heart, and he became very good friends with Capilano, as did his map maker. So after the third year, Captain Vancouver was not allowed to come back to Vancouver. They took away his ship. They took away his everything, and he had to stay in England. And there's been a trace put on that information by some of the relatives I have in Capilano today. It's an amazing story that's happened 200 years later. We've found more information than we've ever found. So Joseph Baker kept coming, and Joseph Baker ended up having a relationship with Capilano's daughter, and they had 2 children. Now, if you go to Capilano today, you will find lots of names they're called Josephs or Bakers. And so there's Joseph Baker. He left behind his name. They took those names. So there's a whole 200 years of no one really knowing what took place here because no one was investigating it. Time elapsed. He went home. He didn't come back. The children stayed. They intermarried with all of us. We know the names Joseph and Baker. We also know that Capilano is Musqueam. He was here originally on the street that I live in, the village I live in. It's called Molly. We're called the Molly people. He eventually made his way to the Capilano River, where he built his homestead, they called them. And he had 1 or more wives. And those days you could. And I think even today you can, if you go and look down. I think it's called Sister Wives on TV.
I was going to say that.
Yeah. So, in some cultures you can do that. And I think even in an African culture, one of them, the women get to have a few husbands. That sounds like a good idea. What do you think? I don't know. I don't even think I can handle one at this time.
Right.
So, life evolved from there. And there's been a huge story built around that now, because one of the family members is researching his history. And I don't want to get too much into it because it's his story, but I am related to him because Capilano had a Musqueam wife and he had a Squamish wife. So we're kind of all interrelated, and it becomes very political today. We have land issues because Snock, which is under the Granville Bridge, was a shared place, but we get to go to court, and a white judge who never lived here, doesn't know our laws, gets to decide who actually owns that area. And it's like having your own children and them fighting over your land, which people do in cases anyway. But for us, another situation, we're going to court with our own relatives in different situations over land or food. And it really upsets me that we go to these colonial courts and have them make a decision on our history when we should actually be going into our longhouse and we should shut the door and we should do the work based on what we're always talking about, our history, our laws, our land titles. Everything should be done that way. Except we have been so assimilated. We have been, so programmed to only go the route of the colonial way that, there's uncertainty there for ourselves. We're not sure if we should do that or shouldn't we do that. And me, I'm such a traditionalist. That's what I would like to see happen. And if my grandfather was here, he would agree. He's gone to both courtrooms. He went to Supreme Court for us for the Shaughnessy case. And while he was in the Shaughnessy case, he was the most, important witness. I think he was 75 or 8 around there when he went. He flew to Ottawa. Just had cataract surgery. Shouldn't have flown, but he did because he believed in the history of his people and the rights that there was a breach of contract at this beautiful golf course up here that you can't even join unless it's over 100,000. Beautiful land that we'll receive back in about 30 years. I think it is coming up quickly. We need that land back because now we have, we're overrun. We don't have room ourselves in our community for our housing, for our people. Population explosion, which I suppose is positive, but it creates different challenges, not only in Musqueam, but throughout all of Canada, I would say, and every reserve is going through this. So Captain Vancouver became a very good friend of Capilano's, and so did Joseph Baker. And the history is passed down to those families in Capilano, and they're doing a big research on it now. In fact, I am a weaver. I've been a weaver for some 30 years now, and I began the process of the search, to search my soul, to ask myself, who am I? I think we're asking ourselves that today in the world we're living in. I can't imagine what it's like to live in a city, in an apartment, in a cement building in time like this. So I go down to my river every night and I take pictures of the sunset and I post them for my friends that live in the city who can't get out to see the sunset in the last 2 months. At least they can look at the computer and they can see the sun going down. And I can't imagine what it's like. So, I was really on a search for the identity of our people since residential school. And we all know what's happened with residential school because you've had people on who have discussed it thoroughly. And, my father was there, my grandfather, my family members, but he wouldn't let us go. So fortunately, I didn't attend the school, but I have the repercussions of it because of him and the way he raised us. And it wasn't always the most joyous home to live in, but it was one where we felt everybody in our village was the same. Everyone had a father they feared. And there were good times and bad times, and he suffered. And he actually died at 40 because of his alcohol problem. And yet he could be a Jekyll and Hyde, so he could binge drink on the weekends and then be the chief all week and be the band manager and have a passion so deep that it hurt him that he wanted to help his people. That was his goal. That was his father's goal and all the goals of the chiefs before. And we all know that. All of our chiefs passionately cared about the livelihood of all of their people. They didn't just think of themselves. They weren't colonial chiefs. And that was their goal, was to, yes, be involved in the world we live in today, but bring forward the balance of how we as First Nations people exercise our own rights and laws within our communities. I watched a program yesterday where an African-American woman was being interviewed about everything that's happened over the last 2 weeks with the situations that are happening in the US. And she referred to brown people and she said, I don't know why we're holding up First Nations people. They were cannibals. They were They worship people or worship gods when they shouldn't have. And I thought, whoa, false information even by someone you would want to be your ally. And so we have to work harder on educating people about who we are and what our existence is about and was about. And, that's something my grandfather left with me. He's left with me at 100 years old. He said, know who you are and know where you come from. Because if you don't know that, then that's when you feel like you're nothing. And those years I was growing up, I kind of sometimes felt like nothing because I wasn't really sure where I fit in society. In fact, I didn't want to fit into society. In fact, I think I was colonializing before it was even cool. I didn't want to go the route. I didn't want to go the route. I quit school in grade 7. I got to grade 8. I stayed half a year and I said, I'm out of here. And I went to the School of Life, and my mom said, my father passed away when we were very young, so my mother raised all 10 of us. There's 10 of us. So when I told her I didn't want to go to school anymore, that I wasn't interested, she said, okay, get a job. So I got a job with her. I worked in a fish plant, which I absolutely loved because the fish was coming in. It was abundant. We were making good money. And I was happy with that job. And then I got into sports. So I started playing very competitively basketball. My father built the second gym or the first gym. I can't remember if it's the first or the second, maybe the first in Canada. The gymnasium that we have was the first built. So that was one of his prizes that he brought into our community, this gym where we could all go and gather. Prior to that, we didn't have it. And our people way back in time are strong athletes. They were strong athletes. You look at Billy Mills and, there's another fellow, I forgot his name off the top of my head, but these are great athletes who won gold medals in track and field around the world. And then they were questioned about it. Like, why are these brown people so strong? And why are the black people such winners? Hitler even wanted to find out. He didn't like it that these people were beating him in the Olympics. It wasn't a good thing for him. So my father built that rec center. And so we started spending a lot of time there. And, I was kind of self-taught watching the men play basketball, and we didn't have a women's team. And we were young people then. And I really admired watching them, their competitiveness and their stamina and their abilities. To me, it felt like The Last Dance back then with Michael Jordan, because, they were just amazing players. And they would compete all over the coast. So we got to know every village on the coast. We had friends, and we still do. We gather all the time. And so it was a very competitive world then. And we ended up, with a girls' team, and then we started competing. And teams popped up all over the coast, and we competed all over the coast. And we were quite competitive. We were always first, second, or third. And I would always come away with, I can brag now, but I couldn't then. So MVP or high scorer, but I took that sport very seriously in discipline. And I didn't want to be better than anybody. I wanted to be the best that I could be. Mm-hmm. I trained by myself all the time. I didn't just go to 2 practices. I went every day, every night. I ate, slept, and drank this sport. And I realized later in my life that that's what carried me through most of my life, was always relating back to the discipline, and then thinking about our people and the discipline that they had to live in the land that they did, to be able to draw from all of our lands and our waters to be the best boaters. Like, we had to paddle from here to the other side of Vancouver Island, or we would paddle down to what we all know as Washington State now. We made great trips, and so we were strong people, and we balanced that off the land and who we were. And to me, these things started to come clear to me later in my life, and I started thinking back about what will save us as a people. How do we come back to who we are? And I think that's something that's been sort of, we've been so busy being assimilated and colonial, into the colonial world, that we have almost, moved away from ourselves. And I wanted to come back to myself. And so I started going to my grandfather's like every day for the last 15 years of his life. I became his caretaker in a way, and I would take him driving, and he would tell me stories, and he would show me the old village sites, and he would tell me what was valuable to our people. And, you know, I was going to school. You know, I might not have gone to the regular school, but I was going to school with him, and he was teaching me. He was telling me, he was connecting me, and I was gaining my self-esteem back. I went through a hard period, as we all do when we're younger, not really knowing what direction to go in, or is that success? Is the only way you're successful is to go out and get a university degree? And when you're getting the degree, you're being taught by people who have been taught by other people about what's important to them, not what's important to us as First Nations. And so I started to see that that was missing. And I wanted to collect all of this. And so I spent time with him. And about that time as well, I was at the museum off and on. And I decided through friends of mine who kind of inspired me too, that they were all the male jewelry makers, engravers, wood carvers. And I would watch them, and I would be like in awe of them and go, wow, what are they creating? What are they being inspired to create? And I was amazed. So I spent 5 years of my life in Alert Bay, north of here. And I walked into the first potlatch that I seen, and I was like taken back. It was amazing. The regalia, the culture, the history, everything that was going on in there, I was in awe of it. And I lived there for 5 years. I learned more about the values of who we are. But I've seen a tipping to the other side of a sort of a contradiction of the hurt that we were all in, the hurt from residential school. So when we went to the Longhouse, we could leave the hurt outside the door. But once we went back outside the door, we picked up and just continued the hurt. And it was evident in all villages, not just one or two. It was the effect of residential school that we never talked about. It was silent. My father never talked about it. He did tell my mother once about a couple of situations. And I thought residential school didn't really affect me until I started really, like I say, digging deep and seeing that maybe some of my sadness was an effect of him in my DNA. Because we also know that we're studying DNA now, and we're seeing that within every gene in our body, it's passed down. But I felt like I wanted to fight that. I felt like I wanted to know more about our people. And the only way I could know was to go back in time instead of going forward or going to university or going anywhere. So I went to my grandfather, and I also went inside myself. Like I found a place that I could relate to for myself, where I just spent time studying Salish design, wondered what happened to it, how it disappeared. Well, we know it was put aside. It was against the law to speak your language, to practice anything that had anything to do with your history. So I spent time, collecting all my thoughts, but also speaking with my ancestors, asking for guidance. And I wasn't going to get guidance from human beings because I didn't think they knew at this point what was going on in any cultures. We were all being assimilated. And so I wanted to be guided by my ancestors, not guided by anybody else. And so that's where I felt the draw to connect with my spirit. And in connecting with it, you understand what goes on in our longhouses in the winter when we're connecting with our history, our people, and the reason we exist, what creation is about, and the balances between it, and what we have lost over 200 years. And I was thirsty for it. So I wanted to know more and more. And I asked for guidance, and I taught myself how to draw. I taught myself how to do jewelry. And I spent about 5 years doing that. And I was in awe of the people who were creating these original designs, the salmon, the birds, the eagles, the thunderbirds. Some of the designs that look like a swirl, and I often wondered where those came from. And I thought about it, and I couldn't at that time, like 20 years ago, 30 years ago, I couldn't figure out where they were getting these beautiful kind of swirl designs that they used on the mountain goat horn bracelets. And the bracelets were made from the horn of the goat because they used the mountain goat for the blankets. But it wasn't just mountain goat, it was a dog that they used to have in their villages that were grown and bred exactly for the blankets. So they weren't really a dog. I'm only using the English term so people understand that. But my grandfather said they were no bigger than a fox. And they weren't a fox, but they were bred for their fur, and they mixed it with a mountain goat. They used fibers from stinging nettle as a core for their blankets. And the whole process is so tedious. It's like working on a tapestry from England or Scotland or, anywhere in the world where people make textiles. That textiles are the base of who we are as all people, as far as I'm concerned. You use the fibers anywhere in your neighborhood, no matter where you come from. So this stinging nettle is not only does it offer us the base of our blanket, it offers us medicine. Because if you drink stinging nettle tea, it purifies your blood. But do we believe that today? No, we're a little skeptical, so we run off to the doctor and we get a pill. And we think, well, a pill's going to cure me. And I would bet you that everybody's tearing around right now trying to find a cure for this virus. It's probably a plant. Maybe it's not in a medical lab. Maybe it's in a plant. Because there's a saying, for every ailment, Creator gives us something to heal with it. And if you think about, the stinging nettle, it purifies your blood. Where'd the virus go? Into your blood, into your system. And if soap can kill it on your hands, what could kill it if you're drinking it or inhaling it, for all that matters? But we don't look there anymore. We're too programmed to go the other way and say, well, let's look at, help over here. And we don't even use our elders anymore the way we did. We don't go and ask them. My grandfather had kind of bad eyes, so he would go and get cherry bark. I'd go with him, park up by top of our village, and I'd sit in the car while he walked in and got the cherry bark. And then he'd bring it home and boil it on the stove. And he'd soak a rag in it, and then he'd soak his eyes in it. And so they knew medicines. They didn't always have to go to the doctor. And I'm not saying that works for everybody today. I know we've all assimilated. We have the same diseases as everyone. God bless the Hopi people who are going through such trauma, high diabetes. They've had a huge number that they're losing. We send up prayers for them on a daily basis throughout Indian country and through. Look at the amazing thing that happened there. When the potato famine was on in Ireland and the people were starving, some of the Hopi people or Navajos collected their money, and they had very little themselves, but they wanted to help these poor people who were starving in Ireland, and they sent the money over. And today, if you go to Ireland, there's this huge, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful sculpture with feathers on it, and it's dedicated to the people here, the Native Americans. So when the situation is happening today, they made a huge collection in Ireland and sent it here to the Navajo Nation. And I'm like, wow, look at that. Look what happens in the universe when good is done to people. And that's a responsibility that a lot of us, especially the people I think you've had on your show and will continue to have, who are aware. And it's a responsibility for me that I carry these messages wherever I go, to educate people, to inform, because we've been educated for 200 years about who they are, and we doubted ourselves. And there's no doubt today about who we are. You know, our roots are planted firmly in the soil that our ancestors are buried, and you know, that information comes to us. And as I said, in our DNA, we're holding that, and we've held it, and now we're going to release it. And we're going to share that wherever we go, whichever culture we are, nation we are. And I think that's what the blankets came forward again for, because they were silenced for 85 years. We didn't see them in Musqueam. We didn't see them in any of the Salish territories except for a little bit in the Chilliwack area, the Salish people. And the more we get to know about them, the more our self-esteem becomes stronger and stronger, and our understanding of why these blankets are. They're not just something pretty to hang on a wall. They are a foundation. And so we stand on them when we do ceremony, when we get a name, when we get married, and even when we send our people off in death, we use them for every part of our life. They're who we are. And woven deep into these blankets are the history of families, the history of the area. It contains the laws of who we are. So when we stand in the longhouse and we call witnesses, we're wearing our blankets. And so it defines us really in who we are. And then when we look at them, as you can see behind me, it's not just about always the beauty. I think you're attracted to beauty, as we all are. And then we wonder, wow, like, that's so beautiful. Where'd it come from? It looks like something that I know of, and I could be from a different culture. So when you look at it and you start to study them, you see the mathematical equations. And so I tell people it's about math, because we're adding, dividing, subtracting. It's about social studies, because we're telling history and stories, we're passing on the information. And it's about science, because I just mentioned earlier, all the fibers that we have to use. And so woven into this is education to our children, to the families. And then when Europeans came, not Captain Vancouver, mind you, but other people came, they thought that we were mindless and that we were just walking around here worshiping idols. And that was farthest from the truth. And so that's what the blankets mean to our culture, to our history. And finally, after 30 years of working with them, quietly and silently with my ancestors and with my families, the patterns are ready. They've been ready now to move out. So I've struggled with becoming contemporary, and I never wanted that. I wanted to stay steeped in my history, but I realized through this beautiful saying, and even I guess in my own inspiration, that, you know, when you plant something and it's planted in the earth and it's underneath in the darkness, it finds its way to the surface, and then it blooms in the sun. And so the blankets now have made their way from that darkness into the light again. And they're lighting all of our people in a way. They're bringing back the value of who we are and sharing that throughout the histories. And that's the meaning of what they are all about. So also in designing, I started to also paint different things that I have. And I started bringing the design elements together. And you know Susan Point, she's an amazing creative person from Musqueam. She's all over the city, all over the world. And we always admire her, and we're in awe of her work. We're in awe of Stan Green and Charles Elliott on the island, and we're watching Luke Marsden and Maynard Johnny and all these individuals who are as well passionate about reflecting the beauty of their history through their creative process. And so, you know, I never wanted to, I'm not going to speak on behalf of them, but I never wanted to do this work to become famous or to make a name for myself. I wanted to bring it forward for all of my people who were so wrongly done, who were so wrongly misinterpreted. And when someone says, wow, for a piece of jewelry or blanket, I honor them. And it's not about me. I'm sort of the messenger. I'm bringing it forward for them. So contemporary world can see that there were functioning, intelligent Native people, First Nations, who lived in this land and respected it. And I think that's the key word we want here, is about the respect of who we are as human beings in relation to creation. Is that everything we did was from creation. We respected it back. We thrived on salmon. When the archaeologist walked with my grandfather, who was chief at the time, over by Sasnom, where we protested for 100 days. But in the 1960s, they built this hotel called the Fraser Arms on top of one of our villages. And while they were going to dig, oh my God, they unleashed a burial ground. So they called my grandfather, and he went, and he was walking with Dr. Borden over top of this midden. And Dr. Borden said, Mr. Sparrow, there had to be thousands and thousands of you. And my grandfather said, yes, well, this is a burial site. So yes, there were thousands, and this is where we would come, because it would be a little bit away from the original village. But deep buried within that is all the reflections of that history that are our belongings. They're not objects. So the archaeologist said, oh, wow, they're just full of objects in here. And I find that insulting, because they're not objects. There are people's personal belongings. They belong to our families. And what is it about non-Aboriginal people that want to dig everybody up, right from the pyramids across the world to the Aztecs to here, and they want to dig us up all the time, and they want to put us in a museum? Like, who said? You know, we don't go to their graveyards and dig them up and take their jewelry. And yet they feel it's nothing to be able to come to ours and do this. And I think that's the shift that we're starting to see, even politically, that they're awakening a little, and that this shift has to happen or the world will collapse. Because I don't know where they're going. Society, I don't know where they're going. And I always say, when I'm out giving welcomes on behalf of my people, I don't want to go with you. Not everybody wants to go with you. And I think what's happened in the last 3 months with this COVID experience, it shut the world down. It brought people to their knees. I've never had better sleeps, because I live across from the airport and there's no more planes flying. I'm going, yay. And somebody said to me once, well, don't you want to fly somewhere? And I'm like, no, I love where I live. I love my land, and I don't like to leave. I love it here. Everything I could ever want is here. And so I don't want to go somewhere else, but I do love other histories and cultures. Don't get me wrong. I can just turn on the computer or the TV, and I can go anywhere I want. I can talk to you in Brazil. So that for me is okay. I don't have to go somewhere. But other people who are now, you know, taking the opportunity to have to stop still in who they are, and reevaluate. They have to reevaluate, what is their life? Who are they? And where do they come from? So, did you get cut off?
I got cut off, but I'm still here, still listening.
Yeah. So, you know, I really feel for, as I said, the world, like having to come to a standstill like this and not really know what to do. I heard someone on Facebook say, wow, now they know how we all feel living in our reservations where we couldn't leave. We had to have permission. So now they got to have permission to leave their homes. Food is scarce. Well, you took all the food away from us, so we know how you feel out there. Yeah, well, and we don't, what is the value of money now? What is the value of who we are when this little tiny virus comes and no one can stop it? The wars can't stop it. The guns can't stop it. Nothing can stop it. So, you know, everybody is in this together now. We have to work at how are we going to stop it? Is it a plant? Is it a scientific? You know, people are against vaccines or against everything. But what I see, you know, is the irony, Emily, is we have been warned and warned about what we're doing to Mother Earth. And we don't really care. We walk over her every day. We're like, oh yeah, this, whatever. And the fact of the matter is, you can only do so much to the land. And then we're doing it not only to the land, we start to do it to the air we breathe. And here's the irony of all of that. We were polluting the air to such a degree now that, you know, global warming is happening, but nobody really wants to believe that either. Oh, well, we can reverse it. And, you know, David Suzuki was on. He's warning us. Scientists are warning us. Government officials in some different areas warn us, but we don't have to be warned because we can just merely look up and see that the pollution is there. And we're polluting Mother Earth's breath. And what do you think this virus is doing? Polluting our breath, stopping us as humans from breathing. So I saw this thing on Facebook and there was Mother Earth here and the little virus there. And the virus says to Mother Earth, do you think they got it?
Well, Deb, why do you think, what do you relate to this profound cognitive dissonance? Why do you think there's such profound cognitive dissonance?
Because I think people forget exactly who they are. I don't think they're related anymore to the humanness of who we are, not only as human spirit. We're disconnected. And that's exactly, you know, my existence is to know why I exist in this world, to be in touch with the universe. And they think it's some romantic thing removed from humanness. It's not. I mean, scientists are telling you in your DNA there is knowledge. Well, where did it come from? They didn't make it. You come into the world with some kind of knowledge that is, you know, you're born with. And they spend all their life assimilating you and me into their way of thinking. Well, I'm telling you, I stepped aside from that. I don't want anything to do with it in some ways, but I do know that there is more to this world than just finding enough money to buy a fancy car or 10 or a mansion, or like how much shopping can we do? How much can we own? What, you know, how much, what is our focus? What is success? You know, to me, success is standing on my blankets, knowing who I am, feeling when this was all going on that I was still content working here. I didn't know that went by, but I reached out to whoever I could because it sounds romantic, doesn't it? Oh, well, you know, that's good for her. Well, it was good. It was good for all of our people at one time. And that saying I said about artists, you know, all throughout the world who are holding on to why we exist. That's what I believe this message is. You humans better slow down and you better reconnect with the whole reason why you even exist, because you don't really even know, you know, and part of my responsibility again is to pass that. And my grandfather also said that to me. He said, everything I tell you, you pass it on to who wants to know. He would tell me over and over and over the stories that we shared together. And that's something that when I mentioned as I go into the city and I meet people and talk to people and I say, well, they say, oh, Debra, I heard you as you did. And I said, well, gee, I'll do my best not to repeat myself. And they say, oh, no, that's okay. And I said, you know what? You're right, because that's how we learn. My grandfather told me it's like going to school, and oral traditions are just as valuable as reading a book, you know, if not sometimes more, you know. I mean, back in the day, 2,000 years ago, there were no books. You read petroglyphs, you read stories in how they were passed down. this blanket, you know, is a storyteller. It's not just, as I said, something pretty to hang there. It has a language of its own. And that's what's valuable to me, is understanding all of this and putting it together so that other people understand another culture is just as valuable as theirs. And I think all cultures are. So what drives us to all want to be American? What drives us to all want to be like the big machine? You know, I don't get it, because like I don't really want to be a part of it. I love nature. I love what it offers us and the respect we should have for it. And you know, how many cities around the world can breathe now? Because we've stopped still in our tracks. We've had to stop. Everyone's gone in, every country, and they can breathe where they couldn't breathe before.
I just want to let you keep talking. I have a lot of questions for you, Deb. I thank you so much for sharing and for weaving those stories together. I mean, I know it's no coincidence that you're able to just weave, you know, so many stories and teachings and experiences together so seamlessly. But you've mentioned something, you know, countries can breathe again. And I find that interesting, because one of the big slogans that we've been seeing over the past weeks after the death of the murder of George Floyd is "I can't breathe." And so I think a lot of these issues have been brought to the surface. Like you said, anything that's happening in the darkness, or it's not recorded, it's not televised, mainstream media won't talk about it, politicians won't acknowledge, comes to light in one way or another. And so there's been a lot that has come to light. The murder of George Floyd, the murder of Chantel Moore last week, ongoing, right, dispossession, incarceration, and assassination. What words might you have for youth, for folks who have the DNA, the strength, the foresight of their ancestors woven into the fabric of their being, but they also carry the trauma, the demons, the burden that society and corrupt people, sick people, and systems place on already overexploited and over-targeted peoples? What words might you have for people who are in the streets right now, or who are trying to find a good way to move forward?
Well, that's a big question. I can only share in thoughts I've had over the years when I look at even the trauma in the US or here with our own youth. I don't, you know, even though I lived in Musqueam, I felt that I didn't know enough. So I sort of went seeking myself. But I see today in all of your age group that surfacing of knowledge as well, but some are not really sure how to put it out there. So sometimes anger surfaces, but you have to get angry to get through to healing. And so, but some people project their anger, personal anger, that has nothing to do with the protests sometimes, because that's where they can do it. And so I think I've gone into schools here in Vancouver where I went to a whole boys, all boys school with grade 9s and 10s, and talked to them about the history here, which they knew nothing about, nothing. And I asked them, if you were given the opportunity to go through a ceremony as a young man from at 12 or 13 years old that would prepare you for manhood, because we don't do that anymore with any culture hardly, would you do it? And these were not Native kids. They all put their hand up. They all said they would do it. And I was like taken back, because I thought none of them would. So what our youth are asking for is more guidance. None of this, oh, well, that's okay. Oh, well, that's youth. You know, my grandson's 15, and sometimes he says, oh, you're too old to know that. I said, there's some things that don't change over eternity. They don't change. How we grow from a young person to an adult is so significant. And we need to put back the values for our youth. We need to give them ceremony, not just when they graduate and have a ceremony and throw their hat and go get drunk. We need to, I mean, that's not all we do. We love to party when we graduate. We deserve it. I'm not going to take that away from them. But the preparation of becoming a woman or a man is gone. And nobody cares anymore. The 12-year-olds are wanting, you know, what the 19-year-olds want and 20, and they're not prepared for it. So I think it's important, and I really feel for the African people that have to live in the US with no roots. They don't have any. So they're rebelling generation after generation because they're not connected anymore. They don't know, and they have to go on ancestor.com to find it. But we don't have to, because I can just ask my family. My Auntie Jerry and my sister Wendy and my brother Wayne have all of our history right back in time for the names, for who we are, for who can use what name and when. And do some of us all use it? No, we don't, because some people don't want to believe anymore and they go off and do their own thing. But we're knowledge keepers. We have to, otherwise, why do we exist? We don't just exist for nothing. We don't just come into the world, get a university job, live happily ever after, and then at a certain age, they write you off. We don't write our elders off. We start to treat them, we're supposed to start to treat them more respectfully than we ever did, because they're the professors. They're the ones who, you know, who hold that, and we put them on a pedestal. But through government and through political, you know, ways the government has dealt with us, we've kind of taken them off the pedestal, but it's time to put them back on. And it's also time to share with those youth, which I am doing. And I've been called to Fort Langley. They want to learn out there, so I'm going to teach out there now. I've become the teacher. And I'm excited about that because the ripple effect has happened. And that's what my sister Wendy and I always talked about, is that we would begin with the fabric of life, and that would ripple out into all aspects. And in this contemporary world we live in, we want to feel like we are connected to something. So I step out of tradition into a more contemporary world, and people have asked me to teach who are not Native. So at first I said no, and then after I really thought about it, I thought, wait a minute, we're all weavers, every culture. So whether you're Scottish, Japanese, African, wherever you come from, we're weavers. And we all make clothes, and we all have a technique that's similar, which is one is tabby, one is twill, and one is twine. Every culture uses it. And so I can teach them to learn to be a weaver. And then just when they thought they were going to learn Salish weaving, I asked them to go home and find a pattern in their history and bring it, and I'll teach them how to do it. And they do. And then we realize, much like the beautiful top you're wearing, that design is universal. And that it doesn't matter where we live, we see a triangle, we see a wave in the water or a zigzag. We can look at any history and see those patterns, but how we put them together makes them unique to us. And so the great Maya Angelou says, we're as much alike as we are different. So let's celebrate that. And I think we should use that in this time, especially down in the South right now where, yeah, people can't breathe. And not only they're, you know, bless his soul, not only can he not breathe, but the whole people are not going to be able to breathe if they don't go and watch the COVID down there, because it's getting out of hand again. And it's scary, and it's uncertainty. We don't know where it's going to go, what it's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, stepping into the contemporary world for me as well was one of my inspirations. As I always work in front of my loom, and I feel like I have voices talking to me. Not literally, but inspiring me. And one of them was that I wouldn't stop till I blanketed the city of Vancouver in our patterns, along with my sister Robin, who I've worked with. We worked together for all of the years we've been together. So that was a goal of ours. You know, we wanted to wrap the city of Vancouver in beautiful patterns, much like you do when you arrive in Navajo country or you arrive to the airport now. So I was walking along, getting a coffee in Kerrisdale, and I looked at a newspaper thing, and it had City of Vancouver Mural Fest. So I went up to it, and I thought, murals, huh? And so I actually emailed the guy who was in charge and said, "You're putting up beautiful murals. Where's Musqueam's murals? The people of the land." And he said, "Hey, love to talk to you about it." So he came down and we had a long conversation, and he brought a couple of the mural guys with him. And before you know it, I said one of my goals was to move the designs now out of their tradition and into a more contemporary world. And I'd love to blanket the whole city in our designing. And they said, "Let's do it." As simple as that. And I said, "Okay, but what do we do?" So we got the opportunity to design the pillars under the Granville Bridge. So when you come into Granville Island now, there's two beautiful pillars that are there that reflect the Salish people. And I designed it with them, and then they went to work painting, and I did go down. I brought my grandson with me, and we went down. And when I arrived there and I saw those those pillars, I was just taken back, and I was taken way back again in time. And I stood where my people stood on Granville Island. That's what you call it. We call it Snock. And I felt their presence. And I think that they were celebrating that day, that this is the first time, besides it being a house post or wood carving, or that the presence of the people's work reflects. And I've told the city of Vancouver, this is your history now too. It's not only just ours, it's yours. You need to acknowledge that you're in Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory. And by doing that, this too is your history, and all the things that were not wanting to be talked about are going to be talked about. And that's the thing, is that Canada has to be accountable to what it's done in order to get over to the next part of how we're going to work through all of this. So we did that one, and then we headed off the next year to 12th and Kingsway, and we did the old, forgot what it's called now, but it was the old Biltmore Hotel on 12th and Kingsway. And how we did that one was the one fellow who I work with came down, and we were having a conversation about what would we do there, because it's huge and massive and bigger than the pillars. So we decided we were looking. There was an abalone shell on my table, who was given. It was given to me by a fellow. His name has slipped my mind, but he did a video on the doctrine of discovery. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. I recommend any of you out there to go on your computer and look up the doctrine of discovery. It's absolutely horrific to what happened. And we all know what happened, but how they put in place the demise and the plan they put in place to do what they did, it's just mind-boggling. It's so mind-boggling. It's in place today. Mm-hmm. It actually is. I mean, Justin Trudeau took a knee. I'm not even going to say anything about that. So we worked harder, and we saw that abalone shell that he had given me. And my friend Gabe said, did you know that if you go under the water, going up the inlet, and and it's all gray and it's murky and it's cold and it's not very attractive, but if you shine a light on it, the whole underwater lights up in color? And I went, what? And he goes, yeah. And I said, well, that's why abalone shells light up. A friend of mine from work, they told me that all along the coast, wherever you see abalone shells, they're absorbing the light from the sun. Mm. And so depending on what the color is, depends on what they absorb and how they will turn out. Mm. So we did that mural on 12th Avenue on the water, the land, the sea, so that when people were driving down Kingsway in road rage, which they do, they had to stop at the red light, and they will look up at that building in all the beautiful colors that it is, and hopefully take a deep breath, breathe in. There goes that breath again, and feel a little bit calmer by looking at it, taking the breath in, and realizing whatever meeting you're trying to get to will still be there, and take a breather to calm your road rage. So that was kind of why we did that. And so we're working on another one right now. So we're moving our way through the whole city. We're going to be doing the Expo 86 cylinders down there by BC Hydro. And this time we're going to team up with 2 other weavers, and we're going to wrap those cylinders in the beauty of blankets as well. So this whole metaphor of wrapping Vancouver is amazing. But not only wrapping Vancouver, the people, not only people here, but people everywhere, that we're all people of the blanket. It doesn't matter like where you are right now, amazing weavers. So it came to me on Earth Day, and maybe this gets to near the end of what I was wanting to tell you earlier. Earth Day came, and I thought, how could I contribute, because we were still in isolation. So I decided to do a picture of the Earth, and I thought, oh, I'm just going to wrap the whole world in a blanket. Wrap the whole world.
I love you.
So here now, I'm really going to have to do this, because it's been kind of a quiet thing for me, but I've shared with a few friends. So I got inspired by our ancestors, and all of them, not just mine, to wrap the world. And I thought, I know what I could do. We'll do a blanket. And so we'll do 12-inch by 12-inch squares, and I will reach out by word of mouth. I don't want to make it hugely public because I might get overwhelmed. And that's why I asked you if you knew any weavers. And from every country in the world, and there's 195 countries. And so we'll ask for 12 by a 12-inch square, and it's going to be all by volunteer, because it's all coming from our heart. The heartbeat of who we are as people, as humans, as spirits. And they'll send them to me, and I will build a 20-foot by 10-foot blanket, and we'll attach every single country onto that blanket, and then we can wrap the world in the fibers made by all the people around the world, all the women and the men who will work on it with me. And so that's the comfort that I felt on Earth Day, that we can do this. We can get through this. I heard on Indian Summer Festival in Vancouver last night, a fellow, his name slipped my mind, but he's a political analyst. He was amazing. And he talked about, all of that money and all of that banking and all of those politics and everything that the world runs by. But he came back right here. He came back to the earth, and he said, we're going to have to work together and redefine what is valuable in our neighborhoods and in our cities, instead of always going so far away from ourselves that we've forgotten the values of life, of why we exist. So that was my inspiration to say, like, I'm not even just going to wrap the city of Vancouver, I'm going to wrap the world now. So, yeah.
Well, I mean, we don't have too much more time, so I do want to give you a chance to share any other thoughts, but even just in this conversation, like, these are the conversations that fill my heart. I know Dawn Marie Duncan Smith, Debra, thank you for your words. You make my heart happy. And it's like she took those words right out of my mouth too, because it can feel overwhelming sometimes. And then just hearing knowledge keepers like yourself, just say something like, oh, and then I figured it out. We need to wrap the whole world. And just when you share what you share, you feel it. You fill our hearts. My heart feels so happy just to hear you speak today, and just to hear your flow of thoughts and what you've chosen to share today. And we're very grateful. So grateful that you've taken the time, and you're always welcome. I was thinking as you were speaking, okay, so I think we're going to do a regular Debra Sparrow show you know, perhaps once every other week or something, because we need to have more time to hear some of these good thoughts. But
Well,
I'd just like to offer you anything else that you want to share.
Well, just thank you. But I don't want to take the credit for it, because what it is a reflection back to who you are. You recognize it because it's there for you. You're the light as well. Your heart knows that. And it's been covered by all of that stuff out there that assimilation has done. And we need to unravel that on these master blankets. We need to unravel the threads. I mean, they've been unraveled. We need to weave back the information that's, it's our saving grace. You know, it's grace when you know who you are. You can stand in that, though, and be strong in it. It doesn't have to mean that grace is weak or that something is not. You know, when I was with my grandfather one time, I said, what's your favorite song? And he said, well, I don't have one. And I said, well, loan me mine. And he said, I said, it's Amazing Grace. And he said, oh. And he said, do you know it? And I said, sure. And he said, sing it for me. And I did, because I said to him, your grace, me being with you today, is grace. And so I'll leave all of you with that, because you're all amazing grace. And that's what we have to remember, is how amazing all of us are. And we can contribute to how we shift this world, because there's a big shift that has to happen. And I think we can do it. All of you out there, all of you who have felt something that moved you today, it's because that shift is happening, and we can stand in that. We can be strong in it. So thank you, Emily, for listening today, because you're not just listening to Debra Sparrow, you're listening to the ancestors.
Hi.
Thank you.